Aiboan, Vanakkam, and a very warm welcome to you all joining us today, in person and online as well. My name is Vasundhara Kalansurya. I'm from Market Development Facility, an Australian government-funded project. We are working as Economic Development Organization, and I'll be your host for this session. It is a pleasure to welcome you all for the 5th session of Thema Talks Season 2, hosted by Thema Collection in collaboration with Gap HQ and Fountain, which is co-funded by the European Union and held as part of the Colombo Conference. For those who may be joining Thema Talks for the very first time, Thema Talks is a platform created by Thema Collection to bring together voices from across the industry, academia, and practice to engage in meaningful conversations around the topics of tourism, sustainability, and the challenges shaping the industry. Tourism contributes significantly to Sri Lanka's economy and the livelihoods. Yet, we are also one of the countries most exposed to climate risk, despite contributing very little to global emissions. The tension of this sits at the heart of our conversation today. The theme of today's conversation, tourism in a changing climate, shaping climate resilience tourism in Sri Lanka. As we all know, tourism is deeply connected to the environment, to its communities, and the changing global realities. In Sri Lanka, the sector is already feeling the effect of shifting weather patterns and environmental pressures, operational disruptions, and changing travel experiences. We can already see multiple number of cancellations coming in due to the geopolitical situations going on. Therefore, this session invites us to reflect on a very important question. How can tourism in Sri Lanka adapt and move forward in a way that is resilient, practical, and very responsible? To further discuss on this matter, we have a wonderful panel joining us today. Let me introduce you to them. Our first speaker is a well-respected voice in biodiversity and conservation. He is an ornithologist with decades of work studying Sri Lanka's ecosystems and the impacts of environmental change on wildlife and human systems. Please welcome Professor Sarath Kotagama, Emeritus Professor at the University of Colombo. Our next speaker focuses on experience, design, and community-based tourism with a strong emphasis on inclusive approaches and adapting travel experience under changing conditions. Ms. Tushini De Silva, Director at Magical Isle Holdings. The next speaker works closely with international travel markets and brings insights into how global uncertainties and climate concerns are reshaping demand for destinations, like Sri Lanka. Mr. Ashan Fernando, Head of Business Development at And Beyond Travel. The next panelist brings hands-on experience translating sustainability into hotel operations, working closely with energy and resource management and resilience within the hospitality sector. Please welcome Ms. Shashika Kaluaheva, Manager Sustainability at Jetwing Hotels. And our final speaker for the session looks at tourism from a strategic lens, exploring how sustainability branding and regenerative thinking can shape the sector's long-term future. Mr. Maxime Vikramasinghe, Director Marketing and Business Development at Thema Collection. Thank you all for being here today. We'll begin the session with 2 rounds of discussion, and then we'll move on to a Q&A session. Please feel free, the ones who are joining online, please feel free to send your questions to specifically Thema Collection chat in your chat box. I'll start the conversation with Professor Sarath Kotagama. Professor, from your perspective, how are climate change and other environmental pressures currently altering wildlife patterns in Sri Lanka, particularly in terms of seasonality and ecosystems?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. It's a actually you can't answer that question because climate change has been happening, but we have not been monitoring. To be very factual, I'm a scientist. I am not a fortune teller. So I need to be able to see changes that are clearly visible through science to say that things are changing. Said that, we can still see some changes which we experience. That may be not scientific because if you ask different people, they will say different stories. We know that the temperature is increasing. We feel the heat more than what we used to feel in the good old days. For example, Nureli is hotter than what I used to be running around as a kid from school at Bandaravilla and often going up to Nureli. It is definitely high. And the meteorology department will tell us that the temperature is 1.2 degrees higher than what it was in the last century. So that science is very clear. Similar at Kurunagala, the monitoring stations have been showing that the temperature is more than 1 degree centigrade, nighttime temperature, but you won't feel it when you're asleep. If not, what are the indicators to tell us that something is happening? Two years ago, there was a publication, I forget the authors, but a publication about climate change impact on the vegetation of the Singharaja World Heritage Site. Very interesting paper, 4 locations within the World Heritage Site was, according to the science that they did from satellite data, not visiting the location at all. Said that there are 4 places where the climate is affecting or the climate change is happening and the vegetation is changing. So I am a little skeptical about all these things when you start saying everything from above the sky. I asked one of the authors, did you even visit the place? So no, we were not in Sri Lanka when we did it. So I think there are sometimes these situations which you have to take very carefully. Is there a change or not? Globally, there is no question about the fact that the temperature is increasing. There is beyond doubt that there are changes happening with respect to the patterns of weather and all of these things. Just take what happened a couple of months ago in this country, Ditwa. Right? Situations like that are very abnormal and it can only happen if something is unusual in the atmosphere, not if it is something usual. Because if it was usual, it should have been generated either in the southwest or in the northeast, at least in the northeast sea, because we are an ocean island and everything that happens in Sri Lanka with respect to climate is dependent upon what happens on the ocean on either side. So if it didn't generate itself under normal circumstances, we have to ask the question why. But then it is not the first time. A similar situation happens way back, I think 1976 or 74. But the great interest here is that it was not something that was small, but it was big. And it went along the country and decided to go out from Point Pedro. Now, those are very unusual things. So in those terms, we know the climate is somewhat unusual. If you ask the data even at the Met Department, they will say, yes, there seems to be something because the minimum amount of data that is required to establish climate change is 70 years. Fortunately, our Met Department has it. I can remember when I was a student many years ago, one Professor Thambaya, not the botany person, showed us at one of the Sri Lanka Association for the Advancement of Science programs that Sri Lanka goes through a 10-year cycle of ups and downs with respect to temperature, rainfall, volume, and so on and so forth. I have not heard of that anymore. But for the fact we feel that, or to a closer fact, we feel that there are changes happening. Now, how would that affect the fauna and the flora? First, the flora. We feel there is dryness. I wouldn't say there is because I don't know. I must be very frank with you. I don't know if any botanist can say that there it is. But we can feel that there seems to be something happening with the dryness of the vegetation. We can feel that there is a change in the distribution patterns of the fauna. Me doing birds, I can tell you a lot of birds are expanding beyond their normal boundaries, which is the dry zone, into the wet zone today. A simple example, which all of us know, is the red wattle lapwing, Kerala. That bird was always in the wet zone, dry zone, sorry. But over the years, it started coming into the wet zone, and today it is almost everywhere in the fields of the wet zone, and way up in Horton Plains also. So you can have a visitor coming and going, but if they decide to stay and breed and continue, then there is something really changing. Now, some of the people say that, well, we have pelicans in the wet zone when we did not have pelicans before 1974. I said, yes, but that has nothing to do with the climate. That has everything to do with the zoological gardens and Mr. Lindy Alvis. Because he decided to bring the birds from outside and keep it in the zoo, clip them, and get them to be feeding every day at 4 o'clock in the evening. And when the feathers came back, they flew away, but they decided, we have to get back to the zoo to get fed. And so they came. And gradually, they started colonizing and breeding in the wet zone, especially in and around Colombo. And we know how it expanded out from the Dehiwala Bridge, then to in front of Royal College, where we had Pembroke Academy. This is historical times, huh? Pembroke Academy. And then from there to opposite the Lake House area, near the former Sri Lanka Air Force headquarters, or before that, the Forest Department headquarters. That's near Bere Lake. And it started moving out that way. So if somebody looks at that, he might say, well, there is a change in terms of the climate. No. So this is where we need clarity carefully. Many of us are trying to find out where is it exactly happening, because we are all concerned about it. We know that it is happening in the world, but is it happening, the question you asked, in Sri Lanka, we still don't have that concrete information to say it is, except for a few examples like what I just mentioned with the lapwing, and maybe even with other species, a few species that are evident. Somebody was trying to say, well, do you think the elephant is moving because of the climate? I said, please, don't try to exaggerate these things. The elephant is moving out of the forest not for any other reason, it doesn't have food there. Maybe, somebody can say, well, maybe because it's drying up, so therefore the food is all in the residential area, so it's all moving out. I would doubt that very much. I wouldn't like to say that, but food definitely is not available for them in the forest. In the 23% of forest cover, that Sri Lanka land-based forest cover that we have, the food is not good. So when you look at that way, yes. But is that due to climate change? That is the question that you have to be very careful. We shouldn't be just putting everything in the basket and trying to interpret it as from something where the science is very, very difficult to interpret, right? If it was something that you can say, I got wounded today, tomorrow I am bleeding today, tomorrow you do this, you will get to go on operation, that's fine. But that is not the case.
I think in that case, it's better, it's high time we start monitoring these numbers so we can answer these questions better. My next question goes to Shashika. For hotels, climate stress is no longer just an environmental issue. It's an operational and a financial one already. So, amidst of these multiple challenges in climate impact, fuel constraints, and rising operational costs, what are the most critical risks currently affecting hotel operations in Sri Lanka?
Ivan, thank you to Thema and the organizers for having me first. If you look at the current scenario, what would be top of mind is the energy cost and availability. It's not just the cost of it now, it's also having the continued availability of energy, not just the diesel and the petrol, but also the reliance on the national grid also in future, which is uncertain for the most part at now. If we look at something as a mitigatory action where we are looking at transitioning into renewables or shifting our focus into that too then carries an investment, high investment requirement, and that itself is also a risk. That is on the energy side of it, but if you look at extreme weather, that carries disruptions, one in terms of operations, it can have impacts, but it also in terms of the supply chain. That is where I think the biggest risk is in these extreme weather events. It's not what you're facing within the hotel in itself or the property in itself. How do people get to your hotel? How do our supplies get to our hotel? The value chain that's involved in it and how it impacts that. That definitely is a risk, and having those risks related to weather events is also then a maintenance cost, an insurance risk maybe. All of that is also kind of compounding that risk. something we don't talk about in terms of the weather or the long-term climate is we talk about energy a lot. What we don't talk enough, I think, is the water availability, which is also at risk because these changing weather patterns also is probably going to affect our water cycles and the availability. We are already seeing it regionally, but I don't think we're seeing it national or in the large scale yet. But that's something we really need to adapt to and take notice of when we plan our operations. And also kind of going beyond the environmental aspect of it, the other risk as an industry we are facing is from a human resource point of it, where we are seeing a lot of migration and talent retention, which is also kind of a risk at the moment. So kind of boiling it down, I think those are the main risks. What might be considered a risk, but also I think is an opportunity, is the actual perception of people, which are hopefully changing. It looks like it is with the newer generations who have access to information, where they're looking at more information from when they're traveling, especially the climate consciousness or the environmental consciousness, which is coming in. So hopefully, while that might be a risk in some aspect, I think it's definitely an opportunity industry can look in to change what they're doing or adapt to the right kind of actions. Yeah.
Thank you, Shashika. I think it is really important, the point you made on water availability, because as a country, Sri Lanka, we're having a lot of rivers and a lot of tanks. We tend to forget that as a critical risk too. My next question goes to Ashan. Climate change is reshaping not only where people travel, but how people decide on the destinations they want to travel to and the operators. With global uncertainties such as the climate change, conflicts, and the rising travel costs, how are travelers' expectations or demand patterns towards Sri Lanka evolving?
Good evening. Firstly, I think one of the biggest changes we've seen within the last decade is travel has changed from aspirational travel to intentional travel. Gone are the days that people look at brochures and think, oh, I should go here. Now it's more or less word of mouth, what they see on social media, and actual facts that people come back and say, oh, you should go here and do this kind of thing. Now, I represent a company that conceptualized out of conservation. So that's in our DNA to see and program ourselves as to see this is key. The give back, the community aspect, the sustainability aspect, and how do you develop around that? So we focus on three very simple aspects: care of the land, care of the people, care of the wild. Those are our pillars. So then everything we do, we try to work around that. Let me just give you a little snapshot. Most people in Sri Lanka, in travel also, forget these little things. We always are pretty much on a rat race trying to sell the same thing. But knowing that travel is now intentional, we need to focus on, oh, people are now looking forward to seeing and understanding things in a more interactive way. How do we cater to that? Like I said, the snapshot. 65,000 square kilometers. So correct me if I'm wrong. But 8 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, 26 national parks, more than 440 species of birds, 35 endemic, 240 subspecies of butterflies, 159, if I'm not, 130 odd species of dragonflies, out of which 59 are endemic, which means more than 50% of our dragonflies are endemic. No one talks about those. So those are things that you want to incorporate to people to build awareness, to build interest in traveling to a country like Sri Lanka. I think we're only second to Costa Rica in terms of being a biodiversity hotspot. People don't talk about that. Sigiriya will always be Sigiriya and people will come to see Sigiriya. But how much more of Sigiriya are you going to take back? You know how the world has evolved. Foreign kids are pretty much on their devices, even locals. Bringing them out here, showing them different birds, understanding and teaching them migratory patterns, getting individuals like Mr. Kotagama involved and, like talking about this impactful travel is the way forward. You need to think, okay, we're not just about selling the same things. In Sri Lanka, how do we program ourselves to be more impactful, get the community involved, be more resilient in what you stand for. If you believe in making a change in something that helps the environment, believe in that. Not only go through a business aspect and say, oh, I might lose my business if I focus more on the environmental aspect. No, believe in what you sell and do that. And there is a conscious level of traveler who would come for that. And Sri Lanka is one of the best places to do that, which is what we keep forgetting. So when these key things happen around the world, this can also be an opportunity for us to see how we can brand Sri Lanka differently. How do we use our resources? I work with a gentleman called Toby Sinclair, who's been in Sri Lanka, in and out of Sri Lanka for the past 50-something years. And he knows every nook and cranny of Asia, not only Sri Lanka. He calls Sri Lanka paradise. He's like, when am I coming back to paradise? I mean, we are not grateful for what we have here. We just focus on the same things and we try to sell the same thing. It doesn't need to come to a situation where a crisis emerges to see how we refocus and regenerate travel. We need to start saying Sri Lanka better or differently or what it actually is. Honestly, you go somewhere else in the world, Maxime, you travel quite a bit, you understand, you see a sunset that people sell for $100, $200, $300. We see a better sunset driving down Marine Drive, which we just take for granted. Bottom line. So how do we actually believe in Sri Lanka and try to use that to basically put it across to the world to see Sri Lanka is not just about culture. There's a lot more that you can do. So we don't need to wait till a crisis emerges to see how we can change. It's about believing in something and focusing on that and basically aspiring to deliver that to a clientele that appreciates it. So, yeah.
Ashan, I have a follow-up question. Yes, you talked about the supply side of it, but where do you see the demand for this coming from? Marketing Sri Lanka as the way that you're suggesting.
Again, it boils down to how you do it. I can give you examples. There's plenty of tourists who come here now to ground their kids, to show them what actual life is. We can't sell the same repetitive tour around every year and think we can survive. We need to adapt. You think of Bali, what do they have? You have a creature and you make coffee out of it and you have a giant swing. Honestly, like, it's not even a comparison, but we don't make use of our resources. It's not just selling the same round tour. So to attract that clientele, you need to build up to a level and position Sri Lanka in a level to say there's a little bit of everything. There's things that your kids can learn. You know, there's things that they can take back. How colorful the birds are. Unless you travel with some of these people, you don't realize the things we miss out. They're driving on the highway thinking, man, your country's so green. Honestly, we take it for granted. So it's not that the people don't know about it. It's just a matter of how we position ourselves and put it across. And like I said, that's why believing in what you sell is important. Even if it comes at a higher price, it will take time, but there will be that clientele who appreciates it. Because now people are conscious about long-haul flights. If they are taking a long-haul flight, this is what you get as a reward and what you expose yourself to having a long-haul flight. So we talk about food. Where else in the world can you take the same fish and have it in 3 different varieties, like within the same tour? You know, where else can you go see a blue whale in the morning and go see a leopard in the evening? Really, like, these are things we don't talk about too much. So it's about attracting that clientele in a significant way that gives them value for taking that flight, that long flight back here. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ashan. That was very insightful. The next question goes towards Tushni. Experience design today has to balance aspirations with uncertainty. As someone working across experience design, how are changing conditions, what we've been talking all this time, the climate change, the costs and all, are affecting your designs, and how have you adopted the redesigning to respond?
Hi, thank you for that. So I think the answer to that is not an acute answer. You have to look at it in a wider way. If you take travel in Sri Lanka, we always say that Sri Lanka is a seasonal destination and the seasons are dependent on the monsoons. But I'm sure many of you have had the experience of explaining to people that even though it's a season, that doesn't mean there will be no rain. Right? But so we have to end up explaining that these are the tropics, so just come ready for the tropics where there might be some rain. But these are things that have been dictated to us. And we have, I think, oversimplified weather patterns in Sri Lanka as a whole. If you go back to the question and take nature-based experiences, of course, they're very easy to understand how they're directly affected. I was on the Pico Trail just weekend before last, and you could see even stage 1, which was very barely affected. You still see how much destruction was there. And stage 2, which is one of the trails that see most, like a very high amount of footfall. Now that is unpassable at the moment because the forest area is completely destroyed and access is destroyed, right? And these are not things we can immediately find alternatives for. However, I think the option is to look wider, look at options all around. If you look at anyone who offers experiences, most things are based in and around the main hubs, right? But the reason why I talk about weather patterns is because we forget to think about cultural experiences being affected by these weather patterns. If you think about culture, it's who we are, what we are, where we came from. Sri Lanka is essentially an agrarian society. And therefore, we had a very intimate knowledge of all the specific nuanced changes in weather. I work with a lot of farmers, and I've come to learn terms I never knew before. Like in the cultural triangle, they have Poson Hulang, which are strong gusts of wind that come in the month of Poson. Then in the Ambalantota, Hambantota areas, they have Nikini Vehi, which is in the month of Nikin, you get 5 solid half-day rains that soak the soil and you make the most of it. But because they deal with weather patterns so closely, they've had to know those things. However, before I came into the travel industry, I didn't really care about the monsoons very much. I'm not going to lie, right? If it rained, hey ho. But coming in, we were told, no, this is how the monsoons are, so this is the area you use, this is the area you don't use. But there is an oversimplification in it. I think one of the examples I can give is Arugambe, right? So if you take this to be Sri Lanka, the northeastern monsoons come diagonally this way, right? So technically the rains affect this quarter, but Arugambe is down here. So why are we oversimplifying and saying everything on the east is affected the same way? The rains in Arugambe comes from November to February. The rest of it is all open. So half of winter, as well as summer, as well as the off-season, right? So it is, and we also oversimplify in what we offer in these areas. Like we think Arugambe is only for surfing, but actually it has some of the most verdant wildlife you can find, from kumana to birding. In like when you go boating in the Urani Lagoon, you see flocks and flocks of birds that you usually see in 1s and 2s in other places. Then when it comes to history and cultural experiences as well, you get Muslim communities, Sinhala communities, Tamil communities, and historical sites to go with it. Places like Magul Mahavihare or Hulannuge, which both go back to the Ruhunu period and the kingdom. And Hulannuge has the longest triple-edged cave in Sri Lanka, but most people even in the area don't know about these, right? But these are the varieties we have in these areas that we don't bother to look deep into. And this is a country where the weather changes with every 30-minute drive. So if we actually stop and think about how these changes are happening in a smaller way, in different small pockets, it is easier for us to look at tourism and make sure the tourists we bring, they understand what you could do during any time of year. Where you could go any time of year and give the best possible experience. And in creating these experiences as well, we have to always think of how responsible we are with them. You have to do everything with purpose. Why do we think this needs to be showcased? What is the effect of bringing someone from the outside and exposing whatever it is you're exposing them to, going to be to that thing? And what the long-term repercussions are. sometimes things are very delicate. You really have to spend time in these places and understand why and how and what will happen as a subsequent, right? And for me, as a solution to these problems is to think widely, think outside the box that we've been taught to put in. We've been put in through, ages and ages of tourism, but understand that we were always people who understood weather patterns very well. And one of the reasons why a lot of these damages happen in Sri Lanka is because we take everything for granted, and like Ashan said, we don't appreciate what is right in front of us, and then we let it destroy right in front of our own eyes. So we have to be cognizant of that in everything we do and carry that responsibility with us and have conversations with both locals, with suppliers, with your own teams about the value of this, because there are things that we know and there are things that we are convinced about, and we have to convince people to do the right thing.
Tushni, with your experience, what area in Sri Lanka would you pick as the most marginalized or labeled as a seasonal place but has the most potential to become a year-round destination?
I think Arugamba is definitely one of them. The thing is, most of Sri Lanka is all year round. Should rain stop you from experiencing something? It's about how well you're ready for something. If you're going to go into a rainy season without your rain gear, then that's the problem. But if you have proper conversations and say, this is great during the rainy period because of this, do you want to try it? Then yes. So everywhere there is potential all year round. It's about how you handle it and the understanding you have.
Thank you, Tushni. Thank you very much. My next question goes to Maxine. The question may no longer be how to minimize the harm, but how tourism can actively contribute to recovery and resilience. With both climate change and global disruptions influencing the sector, how do you see tourism in Sri Lanka evolving beyond conventional and even sustainable models?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you also to all the panelists for being here, to GAP HQ and Colombo Conference and MDF as well, because I think this conversation has been really intriguing and very insightful for me as well. So I think coming back to the question, especially in terms of the global disruptions that are happening, I think that also kind of indicates a few things, right? Because we are seeing that energy and fuel are getting trickier. So I think there is also an onus on owners and businesses to have energy independence, which I think is a very good thing. So I think that is hopefully one of the positives that can hopefully come out of this, because I potentially see, I mean, I might be a pessimistic look, but I don't think these problems will end today or tomorrow. It might flare back up in a year or two. It really depends, actually. It could go fine, it could be even worse. So I think things like that is something that's definitely impacted, and you can see, I think, a lot of people in the industry are taking the steps for more, maybe renewable energy, but I think now people are looking more towards even storing that energy in batteries and then using it for their hotel operations, and that's something that we have seen, we've been trying to do within some of our properties as well. We've got one which is completely energy independent, and we've got a few others that need a bit of work but maybe can get there one day. So I think that's definitely one thing. And I think the other thing that's definitely affected us and has a small connection to climate change as well is connectivity. I think Sri Lanka is quite reliant, and or at least I know us as a business, on the European markets. And connectivity is definitely an issue, but I think there's another topic also about people not wanting to fly to save carbon emissions. But I think that brings back to another interesting point, that, for example, flying direct to a country, you save carbon emissions. So that hopefully that's something also that I think a lot of times we discuss on how to be resilient as a country, but we forget that people have to get to the country as well. So I think that's also something interesting. It's not a huge change in carbon emissions, but I know there's a slight change. I couldn't look up the numbers, but if you're flying direct opposed to that. But I think a few other things also hopefully, will happen. I think now the industry is becoming a lot more conscious about their carbon emissions within Sri Lanka as well. And I think, I know us as a company, we've be very thankful to MDF for helping us through learning and getting our carbon quantifications, which has been very interesting. And I think definitely in the future, there'll be more and more people that will be looking to offset their carbon, will be looking towards regenerative practices when it comes to tourism, to providing more positive impacts. But I think we also have a long way to go in that, because if you see the way certain developments are made and even the way we market ourselves as a destination, it's still very focused on a few areas. And, you know, I mean, I learned just from Tushni talking about all these amazing places, some really cool places that I don't know, and I'm in the industry and I should know about these. We should try and value them. We should try and push them. And I think if we are to be a bit more, I mean, it's very hard actually even to change the mind sometimes of clients overnight, because the classics are the classics, right? You still want to do the classics, even though if you might be in a queue with 500 jeeps causing more harm than good, maybe to a national park. So reorienting people and doing that is a lot of work, and I think I'm hopeful, and I know it is happening with more and more places coming on the tourism map. But I think even having a few properties in these off the beaten track locations, you sometimes, you know, there's one trend, it might start doing well at the start, but then maybe the trend shifts and then it's not doing too well. So it's like we're going from place to place to place to place. So I think those are things also in terms of that we'll have to really, you know, look at, because it's, yeah, I mean, it's quite important. And yeah.
Thank you, Maxime. Having about 20 minutes more left at the clock, I'll quickly go to my second round of questions. Bringing the conversation back to Professor. Given the environmental changes you described, how should the tourism sector rethink its reliance on predictable nature cycles and wildlife-based experiences?
I think a lot of that was said by Rasham or Rasham, right? I think, I don't know, I seem to sometimes say these things and a lot of people get, so you were involved. So from 65, I'm in the tourism industry. Not doing business, but talking. Talking to everybody at the top, talking to everybody in the middle, and ultimately starting with something which had never been with us. Thank you, your father, Maxim Chandra, decided to have a person as a naturalist. Today, how many naturalists are there in the industry? See, it takes time a little bit, but our industry has taken a little longer time to understand that there is this gold mine with us which we have not exploited. Maybe the wrong word, which we have not looked at. It has been always there, but we have never been focusing at that, but we were only focusing about the sun, sea and the sand. That's why we have all the hotels in the western coast and all of that. And as was said, you know, we are still going round the clock. Now it's almost 35, 40 years and I still see going round the clock. Fortunately, Singaraja popped up and a small break. Otherwise, we go from Colombo airport, Anuradhapura, Polonnaru, Anuradhapura, Polonnaru, Sigiriya, Yala, down the beach, airport, out. I believe still more than 70% of the tourists are doing that. We don't break off. Those days used to call it a day out or whatever it is. There were no places to go and stay, even in Kandy, in the early days. But of course, now everything is there. The package designs have yet not changed very much to capture what has been said. That is a weakness that we see, right? I, at the same time, would say I'm a little cautious about opening up everything. But I know for a fact that from Singaraja, which I have worked for more than 40 years, in and out all the time, from the destruction to what it is today, it has recovered. And very few people even recognize the recovery. And some of the visitors who come there, flocks are not there. What is happening? So if they meet me, I say, sorry, you're coming after almost 30, 40 years of recovery. Don't expect things that were seen by us when I did the flock studies for 30 years, from 81, when we saw it. It's not there now. It's different because they also adjust to the changing vegetation. That may not be the case in other places where the disturbance increases and you have more birds. Because birds love changed habitats rather than prime habitats. So you may have a lot of birds in around areas where you have a lot of disturbance. So you may try to capture that. So like even Yala, so many surveys were done. 500 jeeps at the gate and everybody is cursing to get inside. But you ask them coming out, they are all happy because Lucas was seen. So I said, what is this? Right? This is the problem. If that be the case, I know a director of wildlife who was a very senior person. I keep him right at the top. If not for him, I don't think we would have much of the parks or the wildlife as we have it. Wanted to have the Bamboo area designed for leopards. And you can realize how it can be done. The science is there, don't worry. Some people may say, well, it is not good. But then what is Lucas? Lucas himself, to me, is not a wild leopard at all. It's already habituated completely. So there is nothing. It's just simply, if you go to Africa, how do you see lions? You are lucky if you see the lion, but you definitely will see the lion. That is tourism. To see the Masayas coming with the sun back, that's a sight. But then you're going to see it anyway. So there is a little bit of tempering you have to do, but as long as those things are done without impact on the broader and the more sensitive sites, I think still for all, Sri Lanka is a rich place, which to me, I would say, no other country. Talking about food, I say, we don't like the food that my own wife serves me. I'm eating it every day, no? But you go to the neighbors, fantastic. You even ask the hotel visitors, where did you get the best meal? They say, the next hotel. That is something which we have not even captured in this country, I'm telling you. And when the master chef thinks, I said, you can't achieve this. First master chef, no way in Sri Lankan food. Because what is unique is how many of you all realize what is the recipe for tuna paha? There is no recipe for tuna paha. It is just personal experience from the person who is doing it in your household or the cook. So how do you capture that? That is what that matters a lot in this country. I can go on like this. There are a lot of things which we are not capturing in the industry to make it such a unique place that despite whatever the climatic condition outside social happening even at the moment, they will come. I tell you, they will come. But we have to be able to provide it. We have to be able to show it. Where is the Ayubowan? Some people say everybody is reclining and bending down. I said that is the tradition. Do we ever say Api Anna? Do we ever say Api Anna? Api Ano? If you go to a house? Gihilla Enda. Where is it? Where is it in your industry? We must realize this. If we can capture those feelings, those characters, don't worry. Sri Lanka tourism can survive in whatever situation with all the different names we can say. See, being sustainable now is what we should have been always. We have always been that, but we jumped away from that to becoming business-oriented tourism. Now we are coming to the right place.
Thank you, Professor. I'm sorry I have to cut your answer short because of the interest of time. Thank you very much for your insights, though. Shashika, in response to these combined pressures, how has Jetwing Hotels adapted in operations during disruptions like this, fuel crisis and all?
Okay, if you look at disruptions, what you can do immediately is very limited, the changes you can make. But what you really need is to have your strategies and decisions in place so you have long-term resilience. So if you take the example for the fuel crisis, what you can do immediately at a property is kind of prioritize your critical loads, optimize your load management. Beyond that, it's very hard to immediately adapt to something when something changes. But if you look at the energy crisis, having your energy independence really helps. Looking at having good monitoring systems and benchmarks will help kind of refine those benchmarks and help the hotels kind of achieve with what's available. And also, regardless of where the energy is coming from, if it's yours or the grids, looking at your energy efficiencies of the processes you have. So from the energy side, that's really what we have been doing and what we continue to do. When it comes to water and material, again, having your circularity practices in place, your treatments, composting, waste management, all of that, as much as possible within the site, but even with collaborations or partnerships, having those circular practices so that your dependencies on material with the limited resources, you can start managing that, especially when it comes to water and how do you reduce your demand for it in your operations if water is scarce. Uh, Also looking at design from the design side of it as well. When you build your hotels or your properties, how climate sensitive is it? Are you using the ventilation, the lighting that's available so you don't really need the energy in operating it? Have you looked at elevation, water management, in stormwater drainage, all of that, so you can kind of navigate if something extreme happens? Um, when you look at retrofitting older properties, insulation, so that your cooling or heating demand is less, all of that really needs to be considered from a design point of view as well for a property, so that when supply is constrained or limited, you have your practices in place. The other thing is in the supply chains. We as a hotel group, we have prioritized local sourcing for the longest time. So that really helps when the supply chain gets disrupted. So if you're sourcing as local as possible, the chances of it being disrupted becomes less then. So because you're getting stuff from very nearby to you. So building those partnerships, helping those producers, the farmers, the fishers kind of uplift their production or manufacturing side of it as well. So that in turn helps them, but also in turn helps you in the long run. So we have a more consistent supply or a better product in the long run as well. But also looking at the ecosystem kind of buffers. So our natural protections, kind of enhancing those and kind of investing in those as a one, you have to minimize the disruption of it, but two, looking at where it has been disrupted over time, how do we kind of enhance, especially forests, maybe the dunes, maybe the mangroves, which provide natural protection in things like extreme weather events. So how can we kind of restore those habitats as well? So in addition to that, looking at information also, so digitization, looking at monitoring systems, using that data to make informed decisions in demand management, inventory management, which becomes critical when your supply becomes again restrained or constrained. So yeah, those are some of the things we have been looking at in kind of navigating these disruptions.
Thank you, Shashika. Thank you so much. Moving on to Ashan. Based on these shifting travel expectations which you described before, what strategies have you adopted to manage the uncertainties while maintaining reliability?
Keyword there being reliability. Like Professor said, these things take time. But it's the level of trust and value that you build. Simple example, and we're very proud of that. We didn't have a single cancellation during Ditwa or this ongoing crisis because people believe that whatever they were promised will be delivered. And why they make that effort to still come is it's about how we've adapted before a crisis comes through. I'm just going to elaborate on what I spoke before. It's not about crisis management, it's about being proactive. You know, be more engaged with communities. I mean, end of the day, I do represent a foreign organization, but it's the values that it brings to have the local communities involved that brings out the key. Simple example, most tourists that go on a round tour experience a cultural show. You know, the most standardized cultural show you can imagine. How many people actually see or understand the story of the value of a Vestat tour? No, they'll never understand it because they don't go dig deep into communities, speak to people, and go to the source of a dancing school. You know, how the starting category bow down to their elders before starting. Those are the values that people look for now in a country like Sri Lanka. It's not the most standardized thing. They can look at a cultural show on YouTube. They don't need to come to Sri Lanka. It's about integrating these values and showing, okay, this is what it still means. Most people don't know that half the people that engage themselves in the Candy Perahara are generational involvements. People don't know that. That's the value of it. You might have a bank manager rolling down the streets in the evening because his great-grandfather did it, and he does it with so much pride. These are the stories that we need to incorporate and tell people. That's what, to answer your previous question also, to keep these people involved, these are the stories that we need to tell. There's no point in sugarcoating the fact that we had a civil war. We need to tell them the truth because people are inquisitive now. Unlike those days where people look at a brochure and come through, okay, this, what you see is what you get. You move here, take a picture, go to the next place. No. Slow travel is something that was conceptualized mainly or brought into the forefront after COVID. But no, that's not ideally how things are. All our itineraries actually need a lot of work in terms of what do you really want to show them. It's not about the fact that you showed 10 places during a 14-night stay. You can still show 5 to 6 places with a lot more effect and value that they'll take back because they're not going to remember kings and queens. I mean, you can say Anuradhapura was a 1500-year-old kingdom, 126 kings and queens. How many of those names are you going to remember? No, you're not. It's about the stories you tell. So how you put it across is what will attract these people to have more value towards what you sell. Engage with local communities. Tell them how paddy harvesting works. You know, take them to a rural home. Tell them how meals are made. These are the important things. You can always patronize bigger temples and all of that, but take them to a rural temple. Take them in time where a local alms giving happen. Get them involved, show them, tie a pirit nool and say, this is what it is. You have no idea the value they have for that. Example, people come to Sri Lanka celebrating a birthday. 9 out of 10 people give a birthday cake. You can have a birthday cake anywhere else in the world. You give them kiribat, yes, Toshri, give them kiribat, tell them the value of it. This is how we celebrate locally. Before we go for an exam, Auruddu, birth, honestly, the feedback that you get from that, you can't match that. Because those are things that are not mentioned on a brochure. Those are things that are not mentioned on your itinerary. These are things that you identify and say, oh wow, this country has just so much to give. Food. We've hosted plenty of fam trips and they're like, how much of food can a person eat? Because that's how Sri Lanka is. You walk to a random villager's house, they probably don't have food, but they'll still make a cup of tea for you. That's hospitality. You know, we'd have it in our blood, we have it in abundance. It's just that it's not channeled in the right way or to the correct audience. So, you know, it's about making impactful decisions, making impactful itineraries, and selling Sri Lanka for what it is, rather than being reactive and trying to change when something goes wrong. So it's a conscious decision, but everyone has to play their part.
And I think, and Beyond Travel have been being able to retain all your customers during the past few events says that it's a trial and tested method and it works.
Thankfully, yes.
Thank you, Asha. My next question goes to Tushni. Through your work with Women in Travel Collective and community initiatives, how can more inclusive and community-driven approaches contribute to building resilience in tourism?
Like it was mentioned earlier, we're facing a huge brain drain at the moment where we've lost skill, we've lost labor, we've lost people. And this is a country where 52% of the community is made up of women. And yet, I think MDF studies have showed that less than 10% of women are seen in the industry. And that is a very sad situation because we need people in the industry, and yet we talk about the literacy levels in Sri Lanka, the free education and all of that. And that means we have very capable women out there who are not coming into the industry for various reasons. There are multiple reasons for it. Some don't come because of stigma. Some don't come because they think certain things are not for them. I mean, as a person who hikes, the number of people who think hiking is for men, I think 90% of the time I've hiked, it's been with men, right? And also when it comes to visibility, people don't know that they can do these things because they don't see others who are doing it. So it's very important to showcase and tell people that, no, this is something you can do. Because if you don't know it exists, why would you aim for it? So we have to create that aspiration. And I think it is essential right now to create those aspirations because we are facing this limitation in workforce. And the other thing is the tourism industry is such a beautiful um, entity that allows and welcomes so many other industries to be a part of it. So whether you're, when it comes to experiences, I challenge you to quickly name me one person in the industry on the ground doing an experience who is a woman who's not doing a cooking experience, right? But also, Maxim, I see you at Slido AGMs. I'm sure you can attest that if you, at the higher end, for about 300 men at the event, you see about 12 women. I've watched that door and counted, right? So there is a problem with people coming in and a problem with people staying in the industry when it comes to women. But I think we should open those doors to people who are doing what they're doing, who can still plug in, like I said, whether they're weavers or potters or curd makers, or whether they have a love for the nature in their surrounding areas and they want to be naturalists or whatever. We have to create that visibility and let them know that is possible. But also, I think, as people in the industry, we have a responsibility to create awareness about the right way to get into the industry as well. Because if you put your first foot forward with the aim of making money, then your journey is not going to be in the right direction. You have to, before you step into the industry, you need some idea of the right responsibility we have and we carry as people who are essentially ambassadors. Every person a foreigner meets on the ground in Sri Lanka is an ambassador for the country. And that is a huge responsibility we should all carry. And one thing I want to add, which is true for men and women alike, is we have this idea that we think we have to teach the locals, we have to correct the locals, we are the ones who don't know. No, that is not true. We must learn, yes, but also foreigners also don't know certain things. And it is our responsibility to teach them. And not to school them, but to have discussions and educate them. We've had people who've asked to go to, let's say, elephant orphanages or turtle hatcheries, and we say, right, so this is how it operates, and this is the information I can give you, but we cannot get behind these factors, and therefore we do not promote this. If you want to experience something similar, the most ethical things we would recommend would be either Dudawalawe transit camp or the Rakava sanctuary and things like that. And they will 99% of the time say, thank you so much, I had no idea, thank you for educating me, because why should they know? There are so many locals in Sri Lanka who don't know, then why should a foreigner know? And the other thing is, we have to come into the industry with a can-do attitude. However, we should also know where to say no. Because I just completed a 4-part training program for female trail guides on the Pico Trail. And something I told them is, and I tell everyone is, we have to go through this country, through these communities, through these forests, through these areas over and over again. Whereas the foreigner, you meet that one time or maybe a few times over. So whose side should you be on in terms of protecting the culture, the values, and so on? There are times when we have to say, I'd love to help you out with that, but no, because of these reasons.
And the final question for this session goes to Maxime. What does a truly resilient and a regenerative tourism model looks like in practice, and how can businesses realistically move towards it?
Yeah, thank you. I think firstly, I think we need to really look after communities because, we see it on a day-to-day, right? Whenever there's a crisis that hits, whenever there's something, there's mass migration out of the country. There's mass, there's people really struggling that were working with tourism. So I think we also really maybe have to look at how we can really give a fair wage. And, I think in most cases it is, but there are definitely a lot of ways to go in that as well. I think looking after the communities, empowering them, trying to get more and more, working more and more closely with them is definitely something that needs to happen. I think also there needs to be a little bit of a mindset shift in the way we look at tourism, because you see, I think, depending on like we of course try, I mean, we say quite proactive in bringing up new properties and concepts and ideas. And we see that sometimes, that in certain areas, if you talk about especially regenerative tourism, you need to have that positive impact on the environment as well. But it's sometimes quite tough also, but businesses have to take that conscious decision to actually do that. For if you just take an example, like if you're if you're looking after especially your environmental plot or your land or something like that, instead of going for 150 rooms, you can maybe do something a bit more small scale. You can maybe you can create a whole ecosystem about it and around the hotel, not just on your land, but outside of it. So there's a lot of decisions like that, I think, that businesses have to take, and sometimes those decisions actually make your business a bit more resilient as well, because it's curated, it's more I would say it's more personal, it's got higher value for customers than doing a generic block. And I think especially now in Sri Lanka, we see, I think everyone who's, have either, if you're a part of the communities in some popular place, or whether you've got a bit of money and you're a good company and you've got some money, almost everyone's getting into tourism. So I think those are the lessons also, and the education that has to go through a little bit, because so often we just drive down the road. I mean, South Coast is maybe a bad example because it's gone a bit too far, but even in other places you just see big blocks coming up, hotels, things like that. And I think that has a little bit of a negative effect on the long term as well. I mean, not just on the environment, but I think also, I mean, looking after those communities and giving them a bit of guidance on how to do things. And I think Sri Lankan communities, I think you can see from the number of homestays and things, small properties, guest houses that are there, and I think that's really amazing, that model. But maybe we can also work with them, provide them that education, because it's not that far they have to go. They have everything. They have the hospitality, they have very personalized service, which you don't get in a hotel. But what's that next level they can also go sometimes, because it's also a bit of a big competition, and you see whenever something happens, we're all going down in our price to capture that little that's left in the market, right? So it's there's, I think that's really, as a business, how you can have a bit of resilience, and even look at more regenerative practices in that aspect. It kind of could go together, because if you have that type of a property, I think that's really what's in demand. You can probably get a higher price than your competitors, and you can really stand out.
Thank you, Maxim. And with that, we have come to the end of the discussion rounds and would like to engage with our wonderful audience today. If you have any questions, the floor is now open. Maybe we can take one or two questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you very much for the very interesting discussions, and you discussed from the up to the climate, up to the ecosystems and everything as an ensemble, how we have to arrange. Now, in recent days, what are the sector of tourism is increasing? Which sector that we have to create it? Whether it is professional tourism are coming, or what type of tourists coming? Recently, we have seen that in some of the places, the income generated by through tourism is not elevating, but it is going down. So that is depends on the type of tourists that are coming. So that it is a responsibility of the sector to think very seriously which type of tourists are coming and how we are catering to them, especially when come to the, I mean the ecological tourism, or coming to the nature-loving tourist. Like that, they have to analyze the sector and then differentiate those, and then go with all what you talk about the communities, community engagement, and the community these things. That is what I think if you can say about the sectors.
Ashan, do you think?
Thank you, sir. Just a little numbers. In terms of growth, The traditional markets for Sri Lanka has been India, Germanics, UK. These are the traditional markets. As of late, in terms of revenue generation, it's great that two of the nationalities that have picked up most for Sri Lanka is USA, Canada, and Australia. What that also does is, to answer your question, it automatically brings up the revenue stream that they bring in. Now, a sub part of your question is the amount of backpackers we have in Sri Lanka. Is that really worth it? See, for a community, from a revenue aspect, yes, it does not make too much of sense. I've spoken with hotel managers in the south where they say they walk out of the hotel buffet and order something from the Chunpang or grab a tambili or something like that. Is that the real tourism that we need? Unfortunately, that sector will always be there. Because if you look at some of the global, well-respected, well-renowned travelers, they all started like that. Some of the names like Mr. Jeffrey Kent, who owns Abercrombie and Kent, backpacker. So how do we relate that to Sri Lanka? Does Sri Lanka put too much focus on entertaining these people? It's a great market to have. It's a matter of how you look at it. Example, you need to have things for them to do. The flip side of that question is to engage that higher revenue clientele, does Sri Lanka place itself in a level to attract them or attract enough of them? Which we really don't, in all honesty, in terms of places to stay, things to do. Our country has 2 helicopters. Private sector has 2 helicopters. Both of them are single engine helicopters. That elite clientele won't travel unless it's a twin engine helicopter. Those are the problems. So unfortunately, we need to come up as a country. Yes, we do have our natural resources. We can all go back and forth talking about this, but it needs to come to a level where we need to position ourselves in a certain level to attract this clientele, right? There was a client, I'm not going to disclose any names, came to Sri Lanka 23 December. His net worth was such that he could have paid our country's debt by himself. His first request was a twin engine helicopter, which we didn't have. So that answers your question. We need to bring our country's offering to a certain level that we can cater to that audience that brings in that kind of revenue. So again, going back to what Professor said, it takes time. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka has had so many back and forth situations that I've come across. Momentum is huge in tourism. You know, to build something up, it takes time. So we had 2 great years, and now we're facing the crisis we're facing now. It all impacts. See, the thing is, the beauty of attracting these clients is the fact that if we place ourselves in a position that interests them, they can decide whether they want to go anywhere in the world. It's just that boiling down to the point where we should give them enough resources. So,
Thank you, Ashan. Sorry, I have to cut your answer short given the interest of time. Do we have time to take? Okay. I'm sorry, we don't have time to take another question. But there's going to be a networking session after this, so we can, of course, attend to your question. And with that, we have come to the end of our session today. And a wonderful thank to all of the panelists here for sharing your valuable insights and that valuable time. And my thanks goes to our wonderful audience. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today. And on behalf of the organizers, it's a great pleasure to have you all participating for the 5th session of Thema Talks Season 2. If you're interested in getting more information about Thema's sustainability journey, please visit their website on themacollections.com and their social media on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.